artists, Max Gonzalez and Shane Pilster, that are both part of Do What We Love. They are both muralists and graffiti artists extraordinaire and are going to be dropping a lot of awesome knowledge about the arts today. So hope you enjoy. Take it away, guys.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So yeah, I'm Max Gonzalez. That's Shane. I also
Hello.
go by the graffiti name Gems. So yeah, it's my graffiti name, street art name, muralist name. Yeah, Shane.
I'm Shane Pilster, yeah, and I just go by my name
Mostly.
mostly.
Yeah.
Some people in the streets know me by a different name.
Yeah, so Do What We Love, that's actually a informal arts company, organization slash kind of catch-all for what we do. So anytime we are doing any mural work or someone's trying to find us to hire us, typically they find us through dowhatwelove.com, which is a website that Shane made.
For us.
Yeah, he made it for us. But
Yeah.
so then that's kind of how we operate now. And just because we actually are just two independent artists that just do our artwork as ourselves, it's kind of just helpful to throw a name on there. So if any corporations reach out or whatever, it's like, yeah, we're this official thing.
Yeah, years ago I had shanepilster.com, and then as it expanded and we have other artists working with us, it's a lot easier to have something like one umbrella for a lot of our work.
Yeah, because we do hire a lot of our friends and I don't know, people in the arts community. So instead of saying, hey, here's this random person, we can't do the job right now, here's this person we work with who's under the umbrella of Do What We Love. Mm-hmm. So to rewind quite a lot, myself and Shane, we do come from the traditional background of graffiti, so illegal graffiti, vandalism. I'm from the southwest side of Chicago, where graffiti is just very prevalent. It's just part of the culture, especially part of Chicano culture, where I grew up in a Mexican-American neighborhood. So that is absolutely where my origin of spray paint comes from. Same for Shane.
Yeah, I grew up on the West Coast in the San Francisco Bay, in the South Bay, and then I lived in Santa Cruz for several years, and that's kind of where I really started making a name for myself, or at least getting better, at least I think. And then I moved to Pittsburgh in 2004. I was traveling a bit and ended up coming out to see the whole, see the city and some friends that were living out here.
Yeah, so obviously when we were doing this illegally, we were not making any money off of this. In fact, we were losing a lot of money very quickly. And in both of our cases, we were arrested for our illegal graffiti. In my case, I actually came to art school out in Pittsburgh, Carnegie Mellon. I was able to go there for free, which is cool. But in no way was I selected for that based on my graffiti. They didn't know that I did graffiti. They just knew me for my arts portfolio. And by the time I graduated, 2016, I was Pittsburgh's most wanted graffiti artist, which is a real thing. And Pittsburgh is very, very harsh on its sentencing. So I was looking at 2 to 3 years in prison, $128,000 restitution. And so that was a good motivator to get me to make some money off of my graffiti, and also kind of put myself into perspective of thinking about the long-term goals of what I was doing with spray paint. Similar story with Shane.
For me, I moved out here in February of '04, and then I was arrested in April, so it didn't take long. And my court case took a year and a half, and I ended up getting 250 hours, 250 hours community service and, a couple years of probation. And so I ended up working with a lot of nonprofits. Specifically, the one that I worked with a lot was the League of Young Voters, which got me connected to a lot of different organizations in the city, a lot of people that were kind of movers and shakers, and it really started to build some grassroots for me, or not grassroots, but a foundation in this city in Pittsburgh to work with other organizations and to, see how to develop programming and things like that on a larger scale than just myself.
Yeah, and that's equally not to say that previous to us being arrested, we weren't contributing to society in any way. Prior to that, I was actively volunteering for arts organizations. I was working out here. I was actually worked at a restaurant in Pittsburgh for 5 years doing construction out here. So I was part of the community, but at the same time, I was I guess in a way, kind of tapping into my roots as a graffiti artist from Chicago and saying, this is something I used to do back in Chicago. And I guess feeling a little bit of a diasporic response to moving here. I was just like, I want to tap into something that I used to do. But yeah, and then eventually, after we got caught, after we dealt with sentencing and all that, where I was given over a year of house arrest, and final restitution, $58,000. It was kind of like, okay, I really need to get my stuff together. Although I did go to college for free, I still had a lot of money to pay off. But
Still.
yeah, I still owe $38,000. I don't get off probation until I pay that off. And yeah, Pittsburgh is unique in the way that it sentences so harshly on graffiti. But we're not trying to excuse it in any way. But that's all just to kind of give context to how we transitioned into being professional artists and using spray paint skills. So all this stuff here was still like very much so based in graffiti art and graffiti lettering, but this is all stuff that was done legally, so with permission, where we were able to take our time, do a daylight, not have to be looking over our shoulder every second. Yeah, and so obviously, with permission, the quality of our graffiti drastically improved, especially for myself. I guess Shane has been doing graffiti much, much longer than me. So
Yeah, I started in 97-ish. And yeah, I mean, over the years too, like he was talking about what he was doing before graffiti or while doing graffiti in the past. And I was working in hotels for years in Pittsburgh. I worked as a graphic and web designer, worked at an ad agency, had dozens if not hundreds of clients for graphic design. So I really tried to marry like the graphic elements into my like spray paint lifestyle and like different things that I would paint, just to so a lot of my work actually I try to make it look as graphic as possible and as clean as possible because of that.
yeah, so a lot of the imagery we're showing you right now is a little bit chronological in the way that it's mostly from 2017 forward. So this just kind of shows our roots of getting into muralism and realizing that Pittsburgh's mural scene was just starting to take off, and there honestly was not a lot of competition as far as people that could use spray paint professionally or with a lot of skill in a mural format specifically. Yeah, so in my case, I kind of decided, okay, I'm going to start using this name Gems, my graffiti name, in a way that is an artist name. I started getting opportunities for murals. My first mural was actually with Central Outreach Wellness Center on the North Shore, which is a health clinic. And we actually just finished our 5th mural for them yesterday or 2 days ago. Yeah, so I'm honestly like just really grateful for the people who were willing to support me after, I guess, being...
And even now.
Yeah, and now after everything that I went through. Yeah, and I had always used Wizards as a moniker of my own. Just, I guess the whole idea of like the magician pulling off tricks and hidden gems and just mysticism in that way. But once I started taking the time to develop it more, I started trying the Wizard in different techniques, different styles, which allowed me to obviously get a lot better. And probably like one of the first things I ever tried as far as like a smaller scale artwork that was all spray paint was this portrait of Malcolm X in the bottom right. So that was kind of like my first step into realizing like, okay, I know how to draw portraiture. I went to art school. I know how to do this stuff, but I never really tried to push myself into the realm of realism until that canvas, to be honest. Yeah, and just more and more options started coming forward as far as murals.
Yeah, for me, this is the whole page is all my stuff. I started trying to do murals in Pittsburgh really since I moved here in 04. I'd say in like 08, 09 to like maybe around 2012, we had some success, but it was definitely like a side gig. It was not a full-time job. We started getting more and more projects, but Pittsburgh did not really, like the public did not take to using spray paint as a medium for murals, as Max was saying. So it really was an uphill battle. It was definitely difficult to find different clients and to kind of, the other thing is too, is like I really tried to like push the graffiti style of things and like have like lettering and like this, you know, the backgrounds and styles and graphics that we use in like graffiti painting, like our, you know, my graffiti style. And whereas like with that, like the previous slide, this is like around 2017, 18, I really started to try to branch out, you know, doing things that I guess like my brain kind of worked with in a decent way, as far as like doing like tattoo flash or graphics or like imagery like birds or comic books, like all of that, like just, you know, it works for how I paint, and it's very graphic most of the time. So I'm able to like translate that the same way that I would like a small, like I was just doodling beforehand, you know, so I'm like, I could paint this, you know, as big as this whole room, just from like years of measuring and like looking at different, you know, scale, you know, taking something that's small and like able to enlarge it, just like all of these pieces. And this is all up to 2019.
And also, just to clarify, like everything we're showing so far, most of the things we've shown so far are all spray paint. Even this piece over there, that is all spray paint. Yeah, the canvas I showed you with Malcolm X, all spray paint. These two right here are examples of things not done with spray paint, but are still using the styles of graffiti art. But I guess the reason I say all spray paint is a lot of people have this assumption that spray paint is a very messy medium and a medium that requires much larger scale. But in reality, you can get some extreme detail with spray paint. And I guess that's also kind of like this perception that exists in Pittsburgh a lot. When there were a lot of mural organizations in Pittsburgh in the early 2010s, early 2000s, a lot of them refused to work with spray paint, and a lot of those mural organizations are now gone, where spray paint really is the future of muralism. I guess with the main reason being that
It's the future of everything.
yeah, the longevity of it, the paint holds up much better outside than any sort of acrylic paint or latex paint. It also just goes over any surface very easily. Yeah, and honestly, I've gotten a little bit lazy where I hate pulling out a tube of paint, pouring it out, mixing it, and where now I can just take any color can and put a cap on it, and I know how to work that. And also, as Shane was saying, like Pittsburgh, yeah, it was a little bit behind on muralism in general and spray can art. Myself,
Public art, yeah.
yeah, myself coming from like the southwest side of Chicago, like Chicano, Mexican American community, I was always surrounded with this stuff as a kid. It has always been present, especially with like Mexican American muralism and everything that kind of played off the whole Mexican American muralist movement, like with Diego Rivera and all that. That movement kept going in Chicago, and yeah, it just was such a strong part of my day-to-day life, where every corner store in the area either had a graffiti production of some sort or a mural about the culture of the neighborhood. And yeah, Shane being from the Bay Area, very
Yeah,
similar.
like when I was there in the late 90s and early 2000s, which was really like the heyday or a heyday of a lot of graffiti artists that moved to San Francisco and the Bay Area. And so there was, you know, major players like, you know, Barry McGee or even Shepard Fairey, who didn't do graffiti but still was like very well known now. You know, and there's so many, like Adam Fu, like all the, you know, Revoke, Saber, like you guys would know. But, you know, there was a lot of people that were painting in the city that were just like very inspirational. I went to school with some graffiti writers in high school that I looked up to when I was younger, and just like seeing them draw in, you know, black books and being able to, you know, see that firsthand and meet more and more people. That's like why I was saying earlier that like my art history is really like graffiti based, because that's essentially like all I focused on for many years.
Yeah, and so something to clarify, obviously we're using a lot of graffiti-based terms. And if you notice, we're calling ourselves graffiti writers. So even though we are full-time professional muralists, that's our full-time job, at our core, we still consider ourselves graffiti writers. The term graffiti writer specifically references the origins of contemporary graffiti, spray can graffiti, style writing, where the whole idea was writing your name, your moniker repetitively. And that movement specifically or mostly came from New York and Philadelphia. And also, it's important to reference the origins of this whole art movement. And it did start off as an art movement that was kind of crude as far as the style or skill level of it, but the whole idea was creating an identity, propagating that identity as much as you could. And this really was an art form that was started by children ages 11 to 19 in predominantly black and brown neighborhoods, impoverished neighborhoods. And slowly that art form did transform in spaces like New York. Instead of just graffiti writing on the inside of trains, it started happening on the outside. And really what this was referencing was comic book lettering, advertisement lettering, and also just a method for young impoverished kids to find a voice. Because obviously New York in the early 70s, 80s was incredibly neglected, and most of those kids really did not see any outlet for their voices other than in forms of style writing or hip hop. So that's how we get the origins of hip hop, and then the eventual adoption of graffiti writing into hip hop.
I think all those previous 2 slides that you had were all from the 70s, and this starts to get into the 80s.
Yeah, and then slowly and slowly, obviously, the techniques of these started to grow. And equally with showing you this, we're not saying that this isn't vandalism. This absolutely is vandalism, but that's equally saying that that in no way decreases the legitimacy of the art. It does bring into question like the ethics of the art, but as far as these young children making this, there's a very obvious desire from these kids to make a name, to make an identity. Even if you look at some of the most famous artists out there, Keith Haring, Jean-Michel Basquiat, those are graffiti writers. They did originate as people who did illegal graffiti. In the case of Basquiat, he did the name Samo, and he would write the name Samo with some sort of poetry next to it or prose next to it. And the whole idea here with us talking about this is that we in no way want to negate the efforts of these kids and their influence on us now having a full-time career from this, because if it wasn't for them pushing the limits of spray can art, we wouldn't have contemporary muralism in the way that it exists now.
And then through the 70s and 80s too, a lot of these artists, like as you can see on this, they really started to develop their style, and they would start to get shows in galleries and selling out whole gallery shows and art pieces on canvas, like these smaller ones that we have with us today. They're probably actually better than the ones that we have, but they, their stuff was, it transitioned like even in the late 70s, early 80s into the gallery scene, and New York started, there was definitely a dichotomy of people where there was the people that thought it was just straight vandalism, they didn't understand it, they hated it, and then there was people that had, a huge appreciation for it and really saw that it was becoming its own art form. And it's actually, it's one of the few art forms that have actually been created in our generation, in our lifetimes, everyone pretty much here.
Yeah, and with this art movement that was started by children, like we said, this was something that eventually spread internationally. So if you go to any major city in the world, there is a graffiti scene. And if you ask that graffiti scene, how did it originate? It always points back to this one PBS documentary, Style Wars, that was put out in 1983, which documented young kids in New York doing graffiti. And actually, one of the main photographers, Henry Chalfant, is from the Pennsylvania.
From here, he's from Sewickley. His whole family, his family's from here.
Yeah, so he actually is an incredibly famous photographer. But yeah, he is known for really spreading knowledge of this art form.
And also shout out to Martha Cooper, who also, I don't remember if she worked on Style Wars, but then there was books that documented everything, the spray can art, subway art that came out prior to Style Wars and after. And she's still taking photographs with graffiti writers and of graffiti around the world today.
Yeah, and even artists who were in this film, who were at the time definitely not considering themselves artists, they were young vandals. One of them we actually just had a visit with, who did a talk at the Warhol and also did a whole artist residency with the Carey Furnaces that we work with. His name is Carlos Mayer, and he has a classic scene where someone asks him his name, and they say, "What do you write?"
Mayer.
Mayer. And they're like, "Ma?" And it's like, "No, Mayer." So we get to work with that kid that is
Yeah.
now a man.
Yeah, Style Wars is really interesting, and it's on YouTube. You can watch it for free. It's definitely a classic. It has a lot of a lot of the things that we're talking about. It has interviews with the mayor at the time and interviews with graffiti writers. Cut scene to scene, so you get to really see both sides of it, and also see the Scheme as a graffiti writer is they're in his kitchen interviewing him with his mom, and his mom's like, "I don't understand this. You're out all late," and he's like, "I gotta be the king of the yard," and she's like, "I don't even know what that means," So it's even back then and to this day, I feel like there's a lot of parallels to a graffiti writer's life.
Yeah, yeah, and then even for artists who have visited Pittsburgh, exhibited here, like Shane said, Barry McGee, who is a very famous artist from San Francisco, who exhibited at the
Carnegie Museum,
Yeah,
the
the Carnegie
bicentennial.
Yeah, he exhibited there. Os Gêmeos, which is a pair of twins from Brazil, who exhibited at the
Mattress
Mattress
Factory.
Factory. They had a whole installation there. All of them come from origins of illegal graffiti, and all of them say their art scenes came from Style Wars. Yeah, and it kind of is a sign of I guess it's like implicit need from the youth to express themselves,
Have a voice.
to have a voice that this has always existed, or not even youth, just people in general. Obviously, when we say graffiti, that name.
And to leave a mark, to say
Yeah.
I was here. It's not always like the negative side of vandalism. Sometimes it's Kilroy from World War II, or
Yeah.
like you had the cave paintings.
Yeah, and Kilroy, that obviously at a certain point was no longer one person. If you guys know, Kilroy is just like a moniker that was put around Europe during World War II, and it was mostly just a sign of saying that there was like a Western presence from the United States in the battle areas, and just a sense of reassurance. Equally, there has always been a graffiti movement in hobo culture, so traveling hobos or even railroad workers. These train monikers have existed since the invention of trains. And typically, they're done with a wax marker or chalk or a crayon. But a lot of these guys that have created these hobo monikers still exist today and still go out to the yards or still work the yards, and it's just a form of communication. At its simplest form, the communication is just saying, "I was here," or just saying, "Hello, the thing I wrote is now in your city or your state or your country." Especially with like the invention of like the BNSF Railroad going from Chicago all the way down to Mexico. That was just an amazing form of communication. And eventually this whole idea of a moniker also got absorbed into hip hop graffiti, contemporary graffiti.
I mean, really, how you said it though is like a perfect example of like why graffiti writers still paint on trains. It's like their way of communicating with other people around the country.
Yeah, and just saying, "Hi,
Yeah,
I've seen your work, you see my artwork now."
Yeah, I was going to mention like Chicano graffiti as well. Like there is, like a lot of people have the misconception that they're like a lot of graffiti writers, and as I guess we're kind of classifying it as like hip hop graffiti, but that's like more about style and creating something that is your voice and your own. Whereas like Chicano graffiti like started in LA in like the 50s, even predating the hip hop style stuff in New York. But they're not only saying that they are here, but they're also like, get out of here. It's like territorial, and so it's very different. Like there is not really a very large gang presence in the hip hop graffiti world, which is like a very large misconception in the public, I think.
Yeah, so even like these art forms that existed or came from roots of, I guess, more illegal activities, gang activities, where even at its core, Chicano graffiti was more so rooted in kind of like early Zoot Suit movements, just Chicano people wanting to express their culture in the neighborhood and show alliance and protection. Eventually did lead to gangs, but a lot of the stuff in every city got absorbed into this whole movement of style riding, of everything that came from New York. And every city, all these kids, especially the ones that might have been involved in this gang graffiti, saw the more artistic graffiti and said, ooh, instead of doing this stuff, I want to try to push myself and actually get into that. So in many ways, it has and continues to pull people out of gang activity. Myself being from Chicago, obviously there's an extremely large presence of gangs, and a lot of people, instead of getting into gangs, often will kind of choose one of many identities, whether that is like being a hip hop kid or a rocker, or a skateboarder, or like a graffiti kid, or a mix of all those. In my case, I was kind of a weird mix of all.
I mean, the thing that's dope about graffiti, though, is it really doesn't have any prerequisite. Like, you don't have to be a certain race, class, religion, anything to participate in creating something with letters. One thing I wanted to like talk about too, with like how, so like this is like very old Chicano graffiti, and that's like really in each city. Like if you go to that next slide with like Style Wars and Subway Art, like that came out, well before the internet. And so like even in my day, we had like magazines, VHS tapes, there was like graffiti videos out there, like Style Wars. Style Wars is on PBS, so it was able, you could watch it freely. But so we were watching these things and seeing and like reading these magazines, seeing photos from people around the world and around the country. But that was really like one of the few ways that we could really see different styles from people in different cities around the world. So now it's like, if like Os Gemios, who they're from Sao Paulo, if they painted a mural and posted it on Instagram, we could see that instantly, and we're thousands of miles away. Whereas prior, to the internet and really like social media, it was really more like very regional style. So like that Chicano style led to a lot of styles in LA that look very similar to that, like, it's very reminiscent of that old, I guess, I don't want to say gang graffiti, but it's just like that,
Yeah, just like West
Gothic
Coast style.
lettering, yeah.
Yeah, and even Philadelphia is like we said, one of the major birthplaces of contemporary graffiti. Just with people getting their nicknames out there. One of the original guys was Cornbread, and he actually
Because he just liked cornbread.
just like cornbread.
That's like a wholesome way to get a name.
Yeah, and like if you look at like the top left, a lot of these guys were just writing their nicknames in stylized ways, adding crowns and stars. That's why they're called style riders, just trying to write their name and add style. But eventually that did lead to this very, very specific style of graffiti, of a tag or a signature in Philadelphia that's called a wild style, or a wicked.
Wicked, yeah.
A wicked.
With a T.
A wicket, which if you look at that, you might see that and say like, wow, that's a lot of scribbles. But it's this very, very specific form of typography, which...
And it's also like one of the few cities around the world that is known for their very unique tag style. Like, and that's what we were saying prior is, that even though a lot of people see graffiti as only vandalism and like just these signatures, like, one color and that's it. Most cities around the world, like anywhere from like Barcelona to Eugene, like might have their own regional style that they've developed with the graffiti writers that live there. Whereas in their tags, like a lot of graffiti writers start from just doing tags and then they evolve, they get their bubble letters, or like how we call them like fill-ins or throw-ups, because you throw them up quickly, and then you get it to like straight letters or simple pieces that are kind of like just made out of bars, and then it gets to like more evolved, and you eventually start adding more colors and style to it, and you call it a piece, which is short for like a masterpiece. So, the wickets like are in its just in its own category of just like, that's like a masterpiece, but with it's like somebody showing off like their 10 years of calligraphy skills. But it's done with a spray can.
Yeah, and at its core, like, graffiti is a typographic art form. It is all about lettering, all about the conventions of lettering. Even though a lot of people look at graffiti and say like, okay, there's no rules to it, there are so many rules to it.
Or that it might all look the same.
Yeah, and just to like briefly touch on this, like even Pittsburgh has its very, very strong, influential presence across the world with this graffiti. Like one of the most prominent graffiti crews in the world was started at Peabody High School, now Obama High School. And when we talk about crews, that's really just like friendship collective networks where it's typically like a 3-letter acronym. And yeah, that crew is NSF, but yeah, it was started at Peabody High School, and now it has been around for 30 years, as long as I've been alive. Yeah.
And as I was saying too before, it's not a gang. You know, it's not operated or run like a gang. You know, it's not mafia style or anything. It's like how Max was saying. It's more like a bunch of friends that have each other's backs and paint with each other. And it's more about you know, having like mindsets. And some crews like NSF are pretty large. There's other crews that are only like, you know, less than 10 people.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really just your friends, you know.
And group chats, a lot of group chats.
So many
Yeah.
messages.
But even in like mainstream culture and commercial culture, graffiti is still very present. Nowadays, there's a very popular streetwear brand, Obey, that was started by Shepard Fairey, who was the person that did the original Hope Obama campaign graphics. Yeah, and now it's a brand that people wear around the world. Yeah, and it actually was just started off as this one guy, Shepard Fairey, just putting these stickers everywhere, these posters everywhere.
Yeah, wheat paste posters. That's what I was saying before. Is like he had before it was Obey. You can see that there's like Andre the Giant in the upper left and the lower left there. That was like his Andre the Giant has a posse. He had these giant posters just all over SF and like the Bay, and you know, and then he started expanding and then it developed into a clothing brand essentially.
Yeah, and like we mentioned, even a lot of everyone's favorite artist, Keith Haring, Basquiat, were graffiti writers. The bottom right, those are examples of Basquiat's graffiti. His graffiti name was Samo, or Samo, standing for same oh shit. And then Keith Haring, that's an example of his graffiti on the bottom left. He would use chalk or sort of marker, like a white marker, white chalk, to actually draw on the blank slots for movie posters. So whenever they were taken down in the subway, he would go there and draw them. And even during his heyday, during his fame, he was arrested several times for it. Yeah, and now the same imagery of Keith Haring and Basquiat exists in mainstream culture with rappers and the richest people in the world.
Yeah, fashion, all
yeah.
kinds of things use their imagery.
Yeah, and this is like also examples of like, we teach a lot of kids this art form, and we try to tell them at its core, like we said, it's a typographic art form. All the rules of typography apply, whether that be baseline, cap height,
Stroke width.
yeah, everything, it all applies. And even at its core with tagging, a lot of people look at a tag and say, oh, that's just a mess. A tag is really just a person's signature. Just like as if you were to look at a professional athlete's signature or anyone's signature, it's scribbles. It's absolutely scribbles, but even though a signature might not be legible, it's still really, when you see a good signature, you're like, that is impressive.
Or like handwriting in general, yeah.
Yeah.
It takes practice.
And all this stuff here says Soviet. This is a good example of like pushing typography. But even in the case of this on the top right, it has a consistent baseline, consistent cap line, consistent midpoint. The kerning is all very consistent. Where if you were to look at that on a street, kind of just due to social conditioning of being dismissive towards tagging, you'd be like, oh, that's a scribble.
And that's another really good example of like having something we haven't mentioned, which is can control, which is something that, you know, you develop over years and that we've developed in order to like paint murals and more detailed imagery. But like being able to do something like even just a signature like that with a spray can is very impressive.
Let me check time also. I don't want to keep you guys here too long. So yeah, we got like 23 minutes left?
Sure.
Okay. So yeah, like I said, myself and Shane do a lot of youth education. Shane started the graffiti arts program at Rivers of Steel. He was also one of the founding members of Hemispheric Conversations Urban Art Project, a
Hiccup. We
Yeah,
call it,
Hiccup.
because it's very long.
Hiccup. But that's a University of Pittsburgh funded organization where we bring muralists from Latinx communities, specifically Chicago, Mexico, and other parts of South America. We bring them up to Pittsburgh to give lectures, do murals, do arts exhibitions. But yeah, so a lot of our life is very, very intertwined because we do a lot of art education together. We do all of our murals together.
Yeah, real quick. So the graffiti arts program I started back in 2012, just going on a historic tour at the Cary Furnaces and to see what Rivers of Steel was all about, because I'd been in that place before. I knew that there was tours, or the organization owned it, or ran it, I mean. And ended up talking to Ron Bariff about it, and they were looking for somebody in the graffiti world to not only add new stuff, but also to document the graffiti that was there previously, so we could actually have, what was here, in the previous 20, 30 years before Rivers of Steel got in there. And now, actually a decade old this year, we've brought in artists from all over the country, from Australia, from Mexico. We have workshops, monthly. We actually got Max hired on as part-time employee. We have another friend of ours, Scott, who we is also hired on this year. So it's like slowly expanding, but it really was, I guess even rewind a little bit further back to 2008. Ime Alaquiva started a program called Hip Hop on Lock in right above the Shadow Lounge in East Liberty, and he was working with impoverished neighborhoods and schools, and had the 4 elements of hip hop. And I was, they were essentially getting kids to come in to create like music albums. The kids would they'd, make it look like, or not make it look like, they would actually operate like they were a record label. And so they'd have like A&R rep and like PR, and then, creative, executive producer. And so I worked with them, started developing like graffiti curriculum for schools. And then once I got to Rivers of Steel, 5 years later, we actually used some of that to create like what became the graffiti arts tours and workshops. And then Max was already doing things like that separately, working with the Carnegie Library System, and just with Environmental Charter School with Winchester Thurston. And so once we saw that we were like overlapping in so many different ways, it was like a very easy partnership to like start working on different projects with the youth. And Hiccup was also doing projects with the youth at that point. And so Max, being from Chicago and a Latino from there that paints graffiti, it was like the perfect program for him.
It was a very oddly specific organization that they started that tapped into every single bit of my identity. When I heard about it, I was like, "This is weird." Like,
You're like, "Is this real?"
Who came up with this? Like.
But yeah, just to say, I mean, then we combined a lot of our ideas and curriculum that we had created to, and we're ever evolving it. So we learned things from like what we did last year, the year before, and like keep creating new programs, and also help other educators to like create programs in the same vein. So
yeah, and I guess the important thing to know is like, a lot of the educational aspect of our work is much more so a passion project. It's not the moneymaker. The moneymaker, our day-to-day income, is murals. That fortunately is a very good market to be in. But even with Rivers of Steel, like, we don't have to do this, but
I mean, it's definitely, at this point, it's like my baby. I
Yeah.
would never abandon that project, and it's kind of cool too. Like, I never thought that I would be an educator or a teacher in any way, shape, or form. And now, after doing it for, holy cow, so many years, I've worked with thousands of kids, and like, some of the classes and workshops are very grueling, and I'm like, why am I here? But then, at the end of it, like, the kids are learning things. They're taking some of the ideas that we're teaching them and using them in projects in school. And just their attitudes and their drive and creative force. Like some of the kids come up with some of the most incredibly awesome ideas that I've ever seen, and so that's like every time rejuvenated and ready to do it again, you know. So
Yeah.
we have like 2 months of classes coming up in just a couple of weeks here. So
Yeah, lots of summer camps.
So many.
Yeah, which combined with our like full-time mural career is working 7 days a week, but we do it for the love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess we do what we love.
I guess we do what we love. But yeah, so we do like a lot of outreach also. We go into a lot of high schools, middle schools, elementary schools, teach them how to spray paint. Also,
Yeah, the last few of these are all with Rivers of Steel
yeah.
at different schools around the, I guess the Mon Valley, yeah.
Yeah, this is Rankin Christian Center. But yeah, with a lot of it, like we are directly teaching these kids how to spray paint. They are spray painting a lot of these parts of the mural, and like we do come in and clean it up a little bit. But our goal is to really try to enable them as much as possible to having creative direction and to feeling empowered by what they make. And honestly, it is pretty cool for a kid to be able to drive past something in their neighborhood or go to their school every day and say to their friend, like, yeah, I painted that. Like, I was part of that. And yeah, it just kind of
Gives them ownership, you know, and it also
Yeah.
beautifies their area, their town.
the one.
Another thing too, just to go back real quick about the education element. So like we also give discussions and have discussions with them about the legalities of things, talk about our experience with the law, and like show them, you know, we've worked with some of our friends like Brian Ganella and Jerome Chu to like activate these spaces where in like Bloomfield and in Uptown where people can actually go and paint on a legal wall or permission wall, you know, and have areas, and like, you know, we try to educate them on the ups and downs of painting on other people's property, you know, so
Yeah,
less ups than downs.
like
most of the time.
we acknowledge that there always will be an inherent desire from kids to do vandalism or to put their name out there publicly.
Yeah, with
So-
or without us.
Yeah, so with or without us. So we're like, okay, let's intercept that. Let's tell them outlets to do that in a legal way that won't cost them their safety or any money or anything or their parents' concern. To make money off of this possibly.
Oh.
On the left, that is a project we did with Kappa Arts High School. It's a 450-foot long mural along Strawberry Way in downtown Pittsburgh. And all of the imagery in here was done by the kids. There was 37 different kids, all 8th graders and 11th graders. And we were in their school for like 2 months teaching them. And equally for these kids to go to high school downtown and point out to their friends and say, look, I did that on there, and it's this massive mural. Like it is a very empowering thing, especially for kids in arts school, to show them that this is a real career path.
And we really gave them as much creative freedom as they wanted to take. Too.
Yeah,
we didn't like edit their ideas or tell them something was wrong. We just wanted them to really embrace it and make it their own.
The only like guidance we gave them that was that we were going to make this a rainbow gradient that's 450 feet long. All of the shapes of the outlines and all that, the perimeter, that's all designed by them. All of the content is designed by them and painted by them. So we just, like I said, we want to give them as much agency as possible. But yeah, we also do a lot of art education for adults as well, like yourselves. And we also
Those are adults.
Yeah, we also will be running a workshop in
Oh man, I'll look it up.
August.
Yeah,
August. But yeah, so this is examples of workshops that we've run at the Carey Furnaces.
Speaking of the Carey Furnaces, we do have a graffiti and style writing workshop on July 8th that is open to the public that people can sign up for.
Another project that we have done at the Carey Furnaces is bringing in Boom Concepts, which is an art gallery on Penn Avenue. It's also a community space. It's a Black art group. We brought them in there to teach them spray can art. And Pittsburgh is a unique city in the way where there is not a large minority presence in its graffiti and mural scene. That's largely due to the fact that Pittsburgh is very, very harsh on its sentencing of graffiti crimes, spray can art crimes. So it doesn't really incentivize any minorities to get involved in spray paint art.
More crime.
Yeah, yeah. So especially since traditionally there haven't been legal outlets to practice this medium. So yeah, we've run several workshops where we've taught different artists
And
about this
paid
medium.
all these artists too. We wanted to make sure that they received a stipend.
Yeah, and so that is a huge part of what we try to do with our education, is just to be as inclusive as possible. This whole project was done with Vault Art Studio in Garfield, also in Penn Ave. It's a art studio that specifically serves adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So we worked with them, taught them muralism. All the imagery on here is their imagery. They painted all of it with us. We also made over, I think, like over 30 art pieces together on panels. So we're actually planning an art show for that coming up soon.
And that was actually all funded by a grant that Max won. So like so everything was paid
Yeah,
for.
we paid the artists. Like that's a big part of it too. We don't believe in unpaid artwork or unpaid labor. So yeah, we want to pay everyone as much as possible. And like Shane was saying, we have created those legal spaces for people to practice. If you Google Graffiti Alley, this pops up in Bloomfield. It is a whole alley where anyone can go there any time of the day and paint whatever they want, wherever, go over whoever. So there is.
Yeah, it started
Yeah.
on Trace Brewing, who is an amazing partner to
Yeah.
make this happen.
Yeah, and like there's this knowledge from every artist that like, okay, whatever you paint, it might be gone in a week, it might be gone in a day, or it might stay up there for 2 months, or who knows. So it's just a spot where people can be detached from the artwork, take their photo. And several artists, muralists, have actually started their mural careers here. So like specifically building up their portfolio with work here, taking the photos to just say, hey, this is what I'm capable of. Yeah, and unfortunately, like, spaces like this didn't really exist in Pittsburgh a lot. There was a legal graffiti wall briefly in the early 2000s. It was what was the trail name?
Oh, the Eliza Furnace Trail was legal, and then there was a couple others that people had started, because Pittsburgh definitely has a pretty rich graffiti scene, but you just don't get to see it as often.
Yeah.
You know, there's not like a really cool central place to see the history of Pittsburgh graffiti anywhere.
Yeah, because when we talk about like legal graffiti spaces, there have been spots where like people will reach out to business owners and say, hey, can we do this graffiti production or something that'll be a semi-permanent fixture, permanent fixture here. That has always existed, but there has not really been as many spaces or any spaces where anyone can just go there any time of the day and paint whatever, truly as like a practice space.
And like whereas where we came from, like the San Francisco Bay and Chicago, there was like tons of those spots.
Yeah.
Even in Santa Cruz, there was legal walls that you just walk up to and paint anytime.
Yeah, all these here are like examples of like where we went to property owners where there was like a large amount of tagging, or even just kids showing up with spray cans that weren't involved in graffiti in any way and just writing something profane.
Or even just sometimes just a big wall,
Yeah.
and talking to building owners about having permission to paint some graffiti lettering on it.
Yeah, and so like many times we go to the properties, we try to clean them up as much as possible. And what we tell them is, hey, the best deterrent to tagging or some kid with a spray can that wants to write something stupid is really good graffiti. And with that, we also get a lot of our friends involved who were part of the graffiti scene or are part of the graffiti scene, who are now anywhere from the age range of 20 to 60, and we bring them out to paint with us and continue to give them opportunities where they can paint without having to risk their freedom. Yeah, and luckily we've found many spaces to do this.
I think we have like 8 minutes.
Yeah. So yeah, it's another example of a space where we actually paid artists to learn to spray paint with us. And also with the skill set we have, one of the things I strongly believe in is that rather than trying to like make art about activism, it's much more effective to make art that just is activism. So whether that be someone who has passed away due to any issue of police brutality or anything like that, we always just offer up our services for free and paint portraits. Or even
Or
if,
signage or
yeah, even if someone
banners.
has just passed away, like due to gun violence or something like that, we always say, hey, we know how to do this thing. Let us know where and when, and we'll do it for you.
Yeah, there was a kid, where was that at? Like pretty far south, maybe like an hour south of the city that he committed suicide, and we went down and painted a large portrait of him that was going to be hung outside of a place, you know, like some business that the woman that had reached out to us would talk to the business owner, and they were happy to have like something, you know, to remember that kid.
Yeah.
Which is always like kind of heartbreaking to hear things and, you know, see things like that, but at the same time, you know, we're happy to extend our skills for something like that.
Yeah, and being that graffiti muralism, it's such a public art form. It's something that people see every day. It is very impactful in the way that it almost serves the same function as advertising or just any sort of media. So we understand that it does hold a lot of value. So yeah, we have a lot more works that we can show you.
We have a few minutes for
Yeah.
questions
So
too.
yeah, if you have questions, we'll
Oh,
like
yeah.
flip through a few photos as we show you. But yeah.
I got a question.
Yeah,
Ask
question.
away.
I forget.
Oh no.
You mentioned Wizard.
Yeah.
Is that a specific program, or is that the style you decided to go with?
Oh, like wizard. I mean, so that was like more like a moniker that I was using.
So it was like an actual wizard that he was painting, like you know, in
Like a template?
kind of, yeah.
Yeah, just kind of like almost like a cartoon character in a way that's just like what people know my like graffiti as, is like, oh, the guy that does a lot of wizards with his graffiti.
Like an icon.
Yeah. Yeah, and I just like wizards a lot. I'm a huge like Lord of the Rings fan and all that. Oh,
Yeah.
I'll let you go first in the back.
I didn't see it.
I'm curious to know how you, if somebody like hires you a business to do this huge wall, how do you, sketch it out on the wall? I mean, I understand being an artist and you do something in, you know, your scale on the table. But then to project it, and have all those measurements, I just find that a little daunting. You know, to imagine that.
So very similar to like if you're painting a portrait or doing like live, you know, model drawing, and you're like measuring things out. We essentially do the same thing. So like I was saying earlier, like this little sketch, I could paint as large as the wall by breaking it down into pieces and seeing like, okay, this thing, you know, I might change a little bit of as I'm painting it, but you know, I'm like, all right, if I'm gonna make each one of these bars about the same width, and that width is a foot, then I'm gonna do that consistently. And the same thing when we're painting larger scale things, like that thing is massive, that's the entire side of a building, and we didn't use, Max actually painted that one, I painted the one across the street, but we didn't use any projectors or anything. It's essentially like mapping out. You can use grids, like sometimes in a, you know, rare circumstance, we'll use a projector for something that's very specific, like a logo. But most of the time, yeah, we just go for it.
So I prefer to like never use projectors, even though in some cases it would be to my benefit, but I have like a very specific technique I use that I did use on this one. But also as far as like working in scale, that is something that you learn through being a graffiti artist, someone working in lettering. So just through years and years of drawing a little sketch and then putting it on a wall, that helps. But for myself, I actually use a painter's pole, where at first what I would do, I would put like a little mini roller on there and then dip it into paint and then sketch. So this pole would be like 20 feet long, which is like a crazy forearm workout.
So you can actually kind of
Yeah.
see it as you're sketching, you know,
But
on a
the
large
whole
scale.
reference to that, or the whole idea with that, is that even with the artists that like painted a lot of chapels, or like even the Sistine Chapel, the method they used was having a super long stick and a piece of charcoal on the end. With the whole idea being that you can see the whole surface as you're painting. Because I I just like to be able to see the surface. So if I have this pole, it functions pretty much as just a massive pencil. From there, I was kind of like, okay, well, I hate having to dip it into paint each time. So I actually put a wasp sprayer on there, like a little trigger with a pulley system. And I put spray paint in there. So that's actually how I sketch everything. It looks insane. But yeah, just very slowly. It's not the smoothest thing, but actually from there, I even recently got a fisherman's harness, belt harness, where there's a pivot point in there. So I stick the painter's pole into there and sketch and pull like that. Actually, you also use that method for the mural we just did on Brighton Music Center. So yeah, we just painted up there as well. And yeah, it's just, because a lot of times I'll have a mock-up as a reference, but I hate painting exactly the mock-up, which isn't always to my benefit at being a professional
Well, I think it
artist.
depends on the client too.
Yeah.
Sometimes clients are like, you're painting this is
Yeah.
it. And then, we paint that as
Yeah.
best to our ability.
Business owners tend to specify what they want.
It varies.
They give you pretty
Um,
much carte blanche to, let's say I want a farm scene and you do whatever.
Yeah, I mean, if different business owners, and we've done stuff from everything from somebody's house, in small organizations, to very large organizations, to very large corporate companies, like Dick's Sporting Goods, Sheetz, the Hartford Insurance. We worked with Muros Mural Company that's out of Chicago last year. We did, Verizon last year. So in a lot of these circumstances, we, for the Hartford one, we did multiple renditions of a design. They made their revisions, requests that they had, and then we made those, and then we showed them the design, and they're like, paint that. And we painted it almost exactly how the design was. And then, the one that we just painted up at the Brighton Music Center, they were a little bit more open to us adding and changing things. So Max had put together a design that was just with photographs. So it was here's a photograph of a violin, here's somebody playing a guitar, and they just kind of overlapped in different ways. And then we just ran with the background and the colors, and even Max changed the angle of the violin and everything on the fly to make it fit with the composition of the design on the actual wall better. So it's, it really depends on our clients' needs and specifications. If it's a very corporate client, it's usually buy the book, here it is, we'll paint that. Whereas if it's a small business or an individual, we have a little bit more freedom to really do, get creative with it.
And also, I guess, to touch on process a little more, specifically, a client will reach out, give us a very loose idea. Typically, most clients don't reach out with anything specific, unfortunately, because I try to extract as much information as I can from them, because even if someone says, oh, I just want something vibrant and cool and fun, I know in your head you have a very specific idea up there.
Keywords or marketing words are not very helpful for coming up with creative ideas, it's
Yeah.
so.
So I always ask, please send me as much text detail as you can, and go on Google Images, go on whatever app you're on, and find as many reference photos as you can, because your idea of something that might be whimsical might be very different than my
retro,
idea.
or
Yeah, because I need to get in their head as much as possible. And then as far as composing it, we both used to do a lot more hand-drawn mock-ups.
So many.
Yeah,
They take so long.
Sure.
Literally creating a piece of artwork, for this design that you're just going to throw away because you're, and then you're painting something completely different. So
Yeah.
we definitely do a much less labor-intensive process where it's essentially using photographs and, random imagery and things. So,
Yeah.
and then also creating things, by hand as well if needed. But
So for myself, I even started using a lot of stock imagery. Not for this one. This is actually, I had to sketch for this because this is for Condado Tacos.
they ask for original stuff.
They ask for, yeah. But anytime I'm drawing something that is a specific reference, so a certain person, because I do a lot of portraiture, or a specific show or anything, I never redraw it as the mock-up because I tell them I'm not going to paint a reference of a reference. So if I try to redraw a figure, it's always inherently going to have a little bit of a difference from the original. So then if I reference that, then it's like not true to the original. So yeah, I do compose things digitally as much as possible.
But also not to mention you're recreating that image in your own style on the wall. So you
Yeah.
don't necessarily want to have to take the extra steps to recreate that image in your own style on paper first, just to, I mean, sometimes somebody will ask for that, but at this point with so much work that we have as examples, like we literally have a Google Drive folder that says, here's our mock-up, here's how it came out, and we have all these different side-by-side references, so people can see examples, like real-life examples at this point, but it's not always, we're fortunate because we've been able to paint so many projects that we
Yeah.
can give those examples.
Yeah, because another thought with it too is something is always going to look stylized when I paint it because it's my style. And like, yes, I could put the effort into going into photorealism and try that, but with that, it's kind of like why? Why do that if we're trying to express a certain emotion or a certain anything? Why just go for photorealism when we can be a little more creative than that? And this is the project Shane was talking about. That was a whole campaign for Dick's Sporting Goods, where the mock-up is actually very, very similar to the final product.
Yeah, they were pretty specific on this is the design that we want painted. So we actually painted that at Carey Furnaces and rented the space from Rivers of Steel and hired a photographer, videographer, 232 Creative actually, and they filmed everything and that was like 10 foot by 54 feet if I remember, and we painted that whole thing in 2 days, and then they took all the photographs and everything and then turned it into their welcome back to school campaign that was, I believe, put in like 800 or 900 of their stores around the US. So
And then immediately after painting this and getting documented, we had to paint over it.
yeah,
so
like
that,
literally on the phone with the marketing department. You guys got all the files? All right, cool.
yeah,
Because
we've done that a few times, and like I know that's kind of like inherent part of like there's already impermanence to graffiti, spray can art, where you have to get a little detached from it, which is I know.
And like half
yeah.
of graffiti is all about just having a really cool photo, which I think that one on the top is pretty cool. So.
Yeah, so it is helpful to kind of learn the impermanence of the art form. Any other questions?
She had
I was just gonna say, I'll just wrap up the live.
Yeah.
Because we're at an hour, and then if, like, we have more questions, we can totally do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
With you guys?
Bye-bye.
Thank you. DoWhatWeLove.com.
Yeah,
Good Boy Gyms, out after dark.
yeah. But yeah, I guess